Yeah.
In your opinion, because I've been having conversations on the Big Ten show. We had an Oregon episode and some other stuff where we're talking to these guys, and there seems to be this thing between the Big Ten and the old Pac-12 where the Big Ten teams think that it's going to be a difficult transition for those guys into the Big Ten style of play. The Pac-12 is Scott Frost style, thinking they're going to have to adjust to them. And in your honest opinion, and this is the most difficult thing when doing kind of the power rankings and breaking down what it looks like next year. And I see Moose, our schedule is brutal. Yeah, they didn't do Michigan no favors. But when it comes to doing that stuff, where do you put a team like a USC in the equation against a team like a Nebraska or Wisconsin? Because on the surface, of course, USC looks like they're ahead of where Nebraska and Wisconsin are. However, losing talent, coming over from the Pac-12, and then Wisconsin's probably going to take a step next year. Nebraska should take a step next year. It seems almost impossible to try to gauge what they're going to look like, and is the cold weather going to be a factor, like the grind of the cold weather games for the Pac-12 teams? Like, what is your take on that from an outsider's perspective? Because I firmly believe that the Pac-12 is going to have a little bit of a hard time adjusting to the grind of the Big Ten schedule. And then I have another question outside of that too.
So you're totally right that it's been my experience that ever since this was announced, we're looking at 2 years now, USC, UCLA, but then the other two coming
Yeah.
on board, that when there are Big Ten fans in the chat, they say, oh, we're bigger, we're stronger, we play tougher ball, we play in the cold. They're going to have a tough time adjusting to us and adjusting to our style. They're going to have to man up. They're going to have to hit the weights, do all those things.
Mhm.
Okay. The Pac-12 fans have said, have you seen our offenses? Have you seen our speed and space? Do you see our quarterback play? We're going to be running those guys all over the field. Well, as I tend to do, I pull both of them off of the ledge because they're both on far extremes for one thing.
Exactly, and that's why I'm asking you. I'm
An
curious.
extreme.
Well, you're a Big Ten fan, but you're a little you can separate it more than most.
Yes, because that's how I approach all of
Exactly.
this. Let's understand that what I would have really loved to have seen, Justin, was last year's Pac-12 teams play the Big Ten, because now we're down Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, Cam Ward.
Yep.
We're missing the best quarterbacks in the Pac-12. They had a surge, and that's one of the reasons why the Pac-12 was so much better the last 2 years than the Pac-12 was running close to a decade of garbage.
Yeah.
Like, they were the worst, battling with the ACC for the worst conference, and they really had a surge the last 2 years, played very respectable football, and much of that was coaching upgrades all over the place. Lincoln Riley, Kalen DeBoer, on and on and on, Dan Lanning, and then quarterback upgrades. All those guys are transfer quarterbacks that I just named and more. So that was part of the equation, but I think that a lot of that was temporary. We've seen Caleb DeBoer leave. We've seen all these quarterbacks. They're moving on to the NFL. They're not being replaced by quarterbacks anywhere close to what they are. I'm not saying that they aren't decent players, but
Except maybe Oregon.
That's exactly right. Dylan Gabriel might be able to match and be in that same range as a Bo Nix, but otherwise,
Didn't they get Dante Moore too?
oh, they got Dante Moore to
Yeah.
be their future guy. Absolutely. And he had a rough ride at UCLA his freshman year, but still tons of talent, upside. People need to also, on the Pac-12 side, I've had to lower the hammer on this one. They don't realize that there are typically about 350 to 370 SEC players in the NFL.
Yep.
The Big Ten number's about 70 or 80 less, usually, right in that range. And then the Pac-12 numbers, 100 less, 120 less. There are more players. So I've challenged Pac-12 fans that have been like, oh, we would just run Iowa out of the building. They can't score. They can't do this. Well, you're not going to be playing that kind of game.
Yeah, no.
And understand that you are going to be lining up against more NFL players in the Big Ten than you were in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
But I think when it's all said and done, I would lean more toward the Big Ten because the Big Ten was a better conference. But it's not. There are going to be weekends where we're going to say, see, like the Pac-12 fans, the old Pac-12 fans are going to be beating their chests, say,
Yeah.
see, USC ran whoever, Minnesota out of the building. They beat them 48-13, see? But then the next week it's going to be, oh, Iowa took down Washington 10-7.
Yeah.
They uh, I and I'm going to be running the numbers just like the nerdy kind of people that do this sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to be at the end of the season going, okay, this is how hard it was for these Pac-12 teams, or this is how successful. But you know what I'm going to anticipate? It's going to be a mixed bag.
Yep.
It's going to depend on matchups.
My question to follow up on that, based on the styles that you were talking about, the Iowas and Minnesotas, do you think that the fact, and I saw this somewhere, so it really, really stood out in my mind, and I was kind of thinking about it. I'm like, that's interesting. Do you think that these schools in the Big Ten West that have been recruiting for the style of Big Ten West football are going to be holding themselves back now because they're still recruiting in that same way? Or do you think that they should adjust based on the way the conference is going to change? Or should they just stick, because by what we're talking about now, that's sticking to the tried and true Big Ten. And so do you think that's going to hurt them though? Or do you think that they should transition into kind of a more balanced?
I think that the offensive style and the way they've recruited and run an offense and approached each week that, okay, we're going to get into a slugfest. We're going to
Yep.
run a limited number of plays, 55, 60 plays, not 80 plays. I think it's going to tend to, and again, this isn't an absolute because
Yeah.
it's going to be 100% one way or the other. It's going to tend to hurt them.
Yeah.
I think that they're going to have to play in more games, and this is not just against the Pac-12 teams. This is playing more Big Ten Eastern Division teams. This is going to
Correct.
be seeing Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State on the schedule more. You got to be You're not going to be controlling a game 10-6 in the third quarter all the time. You're
Yeah.
going to have to keep up.
Yeah.
You can't
Because
put that kind of pressure on your defense all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Because you see these, like, for instance, Nebraska. I don't feel like Nebraska is recruiting in a Big Ten West style. Wisconsin, I don't necessarily think Wisconsin's kind of going away from the Big Ten style. But then you have the schools like Iowa and, Minnesota, some of these other schools that are just going to stick to their guns and do what they do. And that's another interesting dynamic, is to see who sticks with their bread and butter and who sticks with, and Kirk Ferentz ain't going to change it up. Kirk Ferentz is set in his ways, and there's a reason he is. Like, it works. What he does, he does well, and he does it with, hasn't always had a ton of talent there. So, it makes sense for Iowa, but I was just curious to know if they're going to kind of get left behind in that regard, based on sticking to just comfort and what they know and not adjusting with the times. Because I feel like there's going to be schools with that mindset that the Pac-12 is going to have to come over here and they're going to have to play, bully ball with us, and they're going to lose. And that's going to make them double down on what they do already well and not expand outward. So I just, just looking at the dynamic of the different recruiting styles between the teams from the West, that was just something that stood out. And I'm really curious to see how that plays out. But I was wondering your thoughts on that.
I think the weather factor is overplayed
It is 100%.
considerably.
100%. I agree.
Is it going to be a factor? Yes. Are there going to be games? Yes. But this is not the NFL, folks. There are
No.
not games in Cleveland in January or in Green Bay in late December.
Yep.
No, the season's over the first week the last week of November. The championship games obviously played indoors.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Minnesota's about as cold as it gets in the Big Ten. Minnesota, Wisconsin, those are the two areas in particular, but
Yep.
also Nebraska, Iowa. Put it this way. There are 4 weekends in November. Like, when do we see our first weekend where, okay, the cold is affecting play?
I'm
Like,
in
it's
Arizona, never.
okay.
So, but
Well,
outside of
for you, no, I'm
yeah,
talking
no, I know, I know.
exactly, exactly. Yours less affecting in
Yeah, that's
November than it was because it was 114 degrees the first game of the season. Yes,
why I
you're
go to
actually
September games in Nebraska.
yeah, you're liking the late November games in Arizona
Yeah,
because I couldn't believe it from the op and I'm going all over the place, but I'll get back to the Big
yeah,
Ten weather discussion. But it didn't strike me until last year when you guys were having those ridiculous temperatures that oh, there are games at Arizona and Arizona State, and it's like 108 degrees.
100 it was 115 for over, like, 2 weeks, and it got up to, like, 120 at a certain point, like, 2 days it hit 120. Yeah, rough.
I hate the cold, and the older I get, the more I hate it. But
Yeah,
if you told me right now you're going to go outside and play a football game in 30 degrees or 115 degrees, I wouldn't even that wouldn't even be a choice. I'm
yeah,
going out and playing in 30-degree
like,
weather.
I'll bundle up. I'll play
Absolutely.
in the heat. Give me the heat.
150.
Give me
There's
the heat.
heat and then there's heat.
Yeah,
85. Yes, give that to me all day.
that's when I'm
But
putting a jacket on.
30
Yeah,
or 115. Yeah. So, but I was thinking about this when these decisions were made, these teams are headed to the Big 10 and everybody starts in on the whole weather debate.
mhm,
Okay, you're playing 4 weekends in November. Usually, I don't notice any weather aside from weather that we could see at any time of year. It could be a downpour
yep,
in the middle of July, but I'm talking about cold. The last 2 weekends of the season, like, I
yep,
mean, like, sub 50, the last 2 weekends of the season, even if we go a little bit earlier than that, consider USC, UCLA, they're going to play half of those games in November at home, number 1, so it's eliminating those, and then the other 2, sure, they could be at Nebraska, they could be at Minnesota, they could be wherever. Uh, the Pac-12 isn't just all nice sunshine and heat. It's not
mm,
all Arizona, California.
no,
Seattle's nasty in the winter. Oregon, they
yep,
have to go to Colorado and play.
yep, and
Utah. Yeah.
and another reason that I think the weather's overplayed, to expand on that, is when we're looking at recruiting, right? We're not looking at like, "Oh, this kid's from Texas, we shouldn't recruit him to Nebraska because he's not playing in the cold weather." But for some reason, when it comes to when they get in college, all of a sudden we're like, "Well, he's gonna struggle in cold weather." Well, if he's played his whole life in Texas and we're trying to recruit him to the Midwest, like, how many Texas players have come and played well? It's never mattered about what environment they played in before. And if they can do that in the transition from high school to college, then they can do that in the transfer from conference to conference. In my opinion, I think it's more so just the grind of the Big Ten schedule and the style of play. I think the weather is just something that's added in there because, like you said, Seattle is not, it's not pretty weather all the time. And because I have family in Seattle and it gets nasty there and it's not, yeah. That's why I think it's overplayed. It's just we put a standard on it, but we only use it when it's convenient to us and works in our favor for the argument sake.
2 of the greatest cold weather quarterbacks in history. One of them's a California kid who went to Michigan, and again, because the college season isn't that cold, didn't have to deal with it in college, but then he went to New England
Yeah,
and he played in blizzards. Of course, his crowning achievement to launch his career was, of course, in the blizzard game against
yeah.
the Oakland Raiders. And I'm talking about Tom Brady and then Brett Favre.
Oh, I thought you were
He
talking about
grew
the
up on the coast in Mississippi
Yep.
and never saw snow in his life. And
He
then he
played in
became this
Lambeau
great, yeah, played at
in
Lambeau
Minnesota.
for all those years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that part's overplayed, but I do and I think teams like Oregon, for instance, Oregon's one of the teams that I think will be fine no matter what, just because they recruit players just like Ohio State, Texas, and all them. I think teams like Oregon are gonna be fine. I think everybody else is gonna have a little bit of a struggle, but Oregon is so constructed as like one of the they're construct as, in my opinion, a top 3 team in college football, or top 4. I'll put them top 4 right now, the way it currently sits. And I don't think the Big Ten schedule is going to be an issue for them.
Now, what is being alluded to here? Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Negative Mike. Now that's a whole different story.
Oh,
The playoffs, the on-campus playoff games. Now there's not going to be many, but those could be fun.
Yep.
Mid-December, somebody's got to go to Wisconsin. If somebody's got to go to wherever,
Yep.
Michigan, to play Nebraska, hopefully hosting a college football playoff game. Wouldn't you love that?
Or we just get a bye and don't have to worry about it. Then we can just go play at the Rose Bowl or something.
Baby steps.
Yeah, I know.
And those aren't even baby steps.
No,
Getting to the playoff, hosting a playoff game.
Right. Bowl game, then playoff.
But yes, if Florida State's got to play at Nebraska in mid-December,
Yep.
Yeah, that could get fun.
Yep. But it's a fun conversation to have for sure, and especially now that we're starting to see some of these teams' recruiting styles. I just think I think that is such an intriguing thing that not enough people are just kind of looking at, is to see what styles of recruiting change. Do any of these teams change their styles, or do they keep it all the same? It's almost as if we're acting like the next season is not going to be a just complete different whole entity of what we know.